Hi and welcome to this annual update on the Tribes and Mannion project. This is a Y-DNA project on family tree DNA that's exploring the early ancestry of the surnames of the medieval kingdom of Mannion. The project is focused on the surnames and territory of Mannion, mainly in South Scotland and East Galway in the west of Ireland. But given that DNA knows no borders, and in order for us to understand the context and origins of the surnames and genetic groupings of the region, we also welcome testers from the surrounding areas. And obviously the diaspora. During the presentation, I talk about the composition of the project after a year. I'll present some updates on tribes and haplogroups, or that is the genetic groupings that I looked at in my initial presentation. And I'll introduce some new proposed tribes and lineages that appear to be identifiable in the DNA. I'll also highlight some general lessons from working with surnames and Y-DNA in terms of the preponderance of certain regional names across various haplogroups. I'll also look at the variant spellings of surnames within particular haplogroups and consider how we can identify Norman and Viking lineages. I'll present all this as research and initial findings, not as conclusive facts. DNA is a constantly evolving field, and as more people test, the picture becomes clearer and clearer and the evidence grows stronger and stronger. So I base all my research on this evidence, but I welcome anyone with alternative interpretations or challenges to my interpretations. I've had over 200 members join the project from a broad range of surnames. About half the surnames are featured on the initial project surname map, but there are additional names on the left. Clearly every name couldn't be included on the promotional map or it would become unintelligible. But we are learning that several of these additional surnames, although not identified in the genealogies and not numerous enough in the census to be included on the initial map, the tester results do indicate that they have deep ancestral roots in the region, either in Mannion or its hinterland. And as we move forward, we'll see how these lineages fit into the genetic networks of the region and how certain combinations of surnames and their distributions can be attributable to a particular tribe. Now, appreciate that referring to these groupings as tribes is not perfect. It has certain negative connotations, but the title of the project and my use of the term is simply a nod to John O'Donovan's Tribes and Customs of Ui Maine, which is not infallible, but it does remain a defining work of the early genealogy of the region. Academics often use terms like population groups or peoples or the Irish term tua. But as long as you appreciate when I say tribe, I'm simply referring to a population group under a headman or a chief without all the additional baggage. And these population groups were likely to be composed of more than one genetic grouping as time went on, but there is undoubtedly an element of the tribe. Otherwise we wouldn't see the relevant surnames coming through grouped together in the DNA as they are in the genealogies. But it is principally the ruling and learned families that are both recorded in the genealogies and that come through strongest in the DNA. Many of our testers are genetically related to these lineages, so we can then attribute these related surname lineages to a particular tribe. And before I move on, I'll just a word on privacy. So I won't identify any individuals or talk about their specific haplogroups or genetic groupings, their genetic markers. I'll only use ancestral overarching haplogroups for the surnames and the tribes. Here you can see the breakdown of the genetic groupings in the project, based on the figures from August when the talk was given during National Heritage Week. You can see the entire project is much more diverse. There are a number of factors at play here, including the larger data set, the inclusion of lineages from a broader region, and of testers with regional surnames, but without confirmed paternal ancestry in the region. But broadly speaking, there are several consistencies across both data sets. For instance, the M222 Connacta, which makes up about 15% of the Irish population. It's closer to 40% in the project and in this region. That includes the Brún, led by the O'Connor Kings of Connacht, the Fiacrach, the Ineo, and the BY198 haplogroup, which is a strong composition of the Mannion surnames. But other overarching haplogroups, Z253, from which the Conmhaigh, the Sil Anmchadha, the Dalcash, emerged, and the DF21, from which the older tribes of Delvin and the Sogain emerged, are also prominent in the broader project and among the local testers. Then at the top of the pie chart you can see in pink haplogroup I2. So those are the remnants of the Neolithic farmers who have been in the northwest of Europe for thousands of years before the arrival of these other haplogroups who arrived with the bell beakers in about 2500 AD. And then on the right you can see the surnames that we've tested locally, and even with low-level testing you can ascribe them to broader haplogroups and often to particular tribes and septs. There's an emerging trend that shows the potential for doing a geographic Y-DNA project like this, and that's when you focus on surnames where we have had two local testers. For instance, the Cain surname. So when we launched the project, we tested one Cain from Roscommon and one from Galway with no known relationship to one another. The initial test confirmed they were a match, and then the more advanced Big Y test confirmed their common ancestor was born in about 1163 AD, so soon after the dawn of the surname era. We also tested two Collachis, which is a rare surname from southeast Galway, and neither of those had a known relationship to one another. Yet again, with advanced testing, their common ancestor is estimated by FDDNA to be in about 1133 AD. Testing of two unrelated Gaetleys then also indicated that they had a common ancestor in about 1500 AD, but we've yet to do advanced testing to confirm the dates. Two coils didn't match one another, but one of them was part of a coil, coin, Kilcoin lineage, which shows these are all variants of an original Irish name. But then the second coil was tested as the closest relative we have in the project to the Ammonia Kellys and Keoghs, so we've submitted the test for advanced testing now. But even among the diaspora, so another local surname, Conmhaigh, we had two Conmhaigh testers from the diaspora with no known relationship to another test, and joined the project, and again their results indicate that they too had a common ancestor in about 1500 AD. So what this shows is the effectiveness of testing surnames in a local geographical context. After initial boom in Y-DNA, a lot of people kind of threw their hands up in the air with the multitude of genetic lineages within each surname. They believed that this was the result of surname DNA switches over generations, but what they're actually seeing is the different regional surname lineages, which all emerged independently of one another. But if you test a particular surname in a particular location, the likelihood of identifying a very early local surname lineages is clearly exponentially higher. To really understand our ancestry, we need to look at both the DNA and traditional records. Ireland is doubly blessed when it comes to this area of research. Thanks to our diaspora, we have some of the best coverage of DNA testing in the world, and due to our manuscript tradition and our ancestors' obsession with descent, we have one of the greatest genealogical collections in the world. Donncha Curran, in the opening to his lecture on the genealogies in the Book of Ballymote, highlighted how awe-inspiring the Irish genealogies are by comparing the 7-generation pedigree ascribed to Charlemagne, King of the Franks and the Holy Roman Empire, to the 162 separate lineages for a relatively minor sept in Kerry called the Kirigi-Lucra. Now, on average, each of those lineages would have controlled about 2,500 acres, so it wasn't just regional kings, but the genealogies went all the way down the social order to record the lines of descent of even local chiefs. And those genealogies traced the male line of descent, which typically also follows the inheritance of the surname. And because the Y chromosome is passed from father to son, almost completely unchanged, we can use it to trace the lines of descent along the surname line back into these genealogies. I say it's passed on almost unchanged because every 2 or 3 generations there's a minor change or a mutation in the DNA that allows us to track and map out the different branches of the surname. That's represented on the diagram on the left here, and then you can see a line veering off to the left also from the main line. Now one of the sons of this lad has a mutation which distinguishes him from the main line, and all his descendants will have that same mutation which distinguishes them from the main line. And because we have a biological clock in that DNA mutates at a relatively regular rate, if we have enough testers, we can estimate the date of this branching point. And we can then compare that against the genealogies. On the right then, you can have a list of the pedigree of the Kelly project member, all the way back to Mannion, so the patronym of the Kingdom of Mannion. If these genealogies are accurate, Brian O'Kelly, who was ambassador to Egypt in the 1970s, was a 45th generation after Mannion. So that line down the centre is the O'Kellys. But along the way, Donal Mór O'Kelly, his grandson Yucad, became Lord of Moy Fen, and his descendants adopted the McKeogh or Keogh surname to distinguish them from the main Kelly line. And comparing the points of intersection between the different surnames, so for instance between Kellys and Keoghs in the DNA and in the genealogies, that's kind of the best way of confirming we're looking at the right haplogroup and confirming the accuracy of the genealogies. Here on top we have the genealogical chart laid out by John O'Donovan in his Tribes and Customs of Ui Maine, specifically the portion outlining descendants of Donal Mór O'Kelly, which, as you can see, includes the descent of the Keoghs on the far right from Diarmid O'Kelly. Below that you can see the family tree DNA block tree for a section of the Kelly haplogroup discussed in my first presentation. Now, since launching the project, we've got a second Keogh tester to upgrade to the Big Y to confirm this line and when those Keoghs branch off from their Kellys. Now, given the way DNA mutates on average every 3 generations, we can't pinpoint a specific date or ancestor, but with an estimated date of birth of 1107 AD for a common ancestor between the Keoghs and the Kellys, this is well within the margins of error for Y-DNA test estimates. And this haplogroup has got a lot much more to recommend it as the Mannion Kellys and Keoghs, but the Kelly project are working on some research for publication at the moment, and I'm working on getting the haplogroup acknowledged on the family tree DNA haplo tree, like the O'Connors and the O'Briens and the Burkes. So once all that's done, then I'll give it a full update on this haplogroup. We also have had a lot of development in the haplogroup provisionally suggested to be that of Sil Anmchadha or South Mannion, whose chiefs were the O'Maddens. You'll notice I make a lot of use of Barry Griffin's surname maps. These are compiled from the returns of 1901 and 1911 census and give a distribution of surname at that time. John Grinham's maps are also great for drilling down into the parish and townland level, and they go back to the 1950s with Griffith's valuation. Maps, place names and historical source are vital for putting the DNA in context, because DNA doesn't tell us a whole pile on its own. There are 2 main branches of the Sil Anmchadha haplogroup, so the Clann or the Conmhaigh branch and the Madden branch. You can see in the middle of the slide here, family tree DNA time tree for the Madden branch. So this is basically the lines of descent for this branch, which also includes the lineage of Hogans on the right. All these Maddens have a common ancestor in about 1150. Hogan's common ancestor is a bit more recent in about 1550, but it may be much older. Of course, the Hogan, or Ogan, is derived from Og, which was often appended to names to distinguish father from son of the same name. So if the father and son were both Owens, the younger one might be nicknamed Owen Og. And if he was famous ancestor, descendants might adopt that appendage of Ogan as their surname. So the O'Hogans may be a branch of the Maddens, or they may have originated as Hogans. We need just to do some more tests of those divergent testers to confirm this. What is certain is that the surname is remembered in at least 2 place names in the Sil Anmchadha region, one alongside Gertie Madden just east of Loughrea and another south of Portumna on Lough Derg. The former, Ballyhogan, according to Log Annam, the place name database goes back to at least 1407 when it's mentioned in the annals, and the location of these place names is also significant in that they're positioned close to the boundaries of the territory, which was basically a way of saying to those outside, you're now entering Madden or Hogan territory. Now the southern Ballyhogan is outside the barony of Longford, which is highlighted in green here, which is generally thought to be relatively coextensive with the territory of Sil Anmchadha, but the place name and the name distribution both suggest that the Sil Anmchadha may have at one stage been extended further southwest. What is striking is the absence of the Maddens from South Roscommon, indicating that while they were overlords of Winter Kenny and Moyfen, otherwise Moore and Totmconnell parishes respectively, they didn't seem to settle in great numbers there. But the main factor that recommends this haplogroup as a descendants of the Sil Anmchadha is the relationship between the Maddens and the Colahans, which parallels that in the genealogies. The second branch then of this haplogroup is the Colohan side, which also includes Kalakis and a good lineage. All three names are incredibly diagnostic, meaning that they are so specific and localized that they effectively identify the origin and location of this genetic grouping at the dawn of the surname era. As you can see, the surnames are concentrated and almost exclusively found in this region. Moreover, whereas the estimated date of the common ancestor of the Maddens and Colahans was a good bit out when I discussed it last year, now that we've tested a few more people, the common ancestor is estimated to have been born in about 800 AD, which is right where it should be according to genealogies. But what this means is that these surname lineages, particularly the Colahans, Kalakis and Goods, remained within a few miles of their ancestral location for over 900 years, which is absolutely incredible. Adrian Martin, in his book on Irish surnames, talks a lot about the importance of place in motivating the adoption of surnames around the turn of the first millennium. This was another way of kind of claiming their patrimony, and hence the later labels of Madden's country, Kelly's country, Keogh's country, and this also goes toward why the genealogies were so meticulously kept. So it's not so surprising in this light that Irish culture and society has attached so much importance to name and place.
Let's talk about a new tribe identification then. During the summer I did a round of recruitment of existing testers, and one of the new genetic groupings identified appears to be consistent with Clann Conmhaigh. Clann Conmhaigh was a tribe and territory on the frontier between Mannion and Macro Connacta territory of the Brún in North Roscommon. The map here is from an article by Daniel Curley about the resurgence of the Mannion in the 14th century under William Bui O'Kelly, having previously lost much of their northern territory to the Brún. And I've overlaid the outline of the territory of Clann Conmhaigh in orange, using the boundaries set out in John O'Donovan's Tribes and Customs of Hermanni. You can see Clann Conmhaigh is sandwiched between the two territories, so it's not too surprising then, given its strategic position on the frontier of the two territories, that Clann Conmhaigh was claimed by both the Mannion and the Brún O'Connors at various times in the medieval period. The chiefs of Clann Conmhaigh were the Connacta, mainly anglicised as Finnerty today, and the Finnertys had their stronghold at Dunaman on River Suck in west central Roscommon. The picture here is of a later castle at this site. The Finnertys appear in the genealogies as a senior branch of the Sil Murray, leading sept of the Brún under the O'Connors, so they were clearly given an important position in the genealogies and lore of the Brún. They were marshals of the forces of Connacht, and it said that they had the privilege of drinking the first cup at every royal feast. The affinities of Mannion, on the other hand, appear in the genealogies as descendants of Clann Conmhaigh, like the Mannion and the Winter Larkin of Sil Anmchadha, from whom they are generally given a descent. But when we compare the DNA of this group to the genealogies, we get a different story. Firstly, even before we look at the DNA, if we look at Bartjaski's family tree of the Sil Murray, composed from the ancient genealogies, we can see the confusion and contradictions within the genealogies around where Clann Conmhaigh and the Finnertys fit in. So you can see at the top that Clann Conmhaigh, certain sources, was given as a descent from Clonmac, the brother of Inrachtuck, the ancestor of the principal line of the Sil Murray. The Finnertys are elsewhere part of Clan Inrachtuck, on the left hand side here, but there was also another Connacta descendant of Tomaltuck over on the right, although it's not clear if he was a progenitor of a Finnerty surname lineage. Certain sources like a Hart explain that Clann Conmhaigh and Clann Merca Finnertys as as two separate septs, seemingly as an attempt to explain Finnerty's being attached to both the Ibrun and the Emania. But the DNA of this group shows that they are completely genetically distinct from both the Ibrun and the Emania. In fact, you would have to go all the way back to the marker DF13 in 2500 BC to see their common ancestor, and that's during the initial migration of the Bell Beakers to Britain and Ireland. So there are no Finnerty lineages among the A259 Ibrun, among the Emania Kelly and Keogh grouping, among the BY198 Emania surname lineages, or among the Sil Anmchadha. But we do have this consolidated group of Finnertys here with a common ancestor in 1288. And what recommends it most as a genetic signature of the Clann Conmhaigh is that of the now 7 advanced testers, 5 are Finnertys, or variants of that name, and another is a Conway, who clearly adopted the clan name as a surname. One thing that often baffles people is why their DNA matches have people with similar but different surnames. For instance, not many people would at first sight consider Finnerty and Finton to be the same name. And if it weren't for like say Edward MacLeisett, we'd never really know that they had the same origins. But in this respect, the DNA backs up MacLeisett's surname dictionary. Generally, the diversity of names is largely the product of the way different branches of a surname anglicize the name, and often the spelling continued to evolve over time. So you can see here, within this genetic grouping, we have the typical Finnerty spelling, we have Finnerty with an E, we have Finati and Finton, which accurately mirrors 4 out of the 5 variants recorded by MacLeisett. The most important and divergent of these is Finton, which was adopted by the Connactas of Kerry. MacLeisett says these Fintons were a different sept, but in fact one of our testers in this group is a Finton with ancestry in Kerry, indicating that even the Fintons were part of the Clann Conmhaigh diaspora. I say diaspora because by 1901, as you can see in Barry Griffin's map here, there were hardly any Finnertys left in Clann Conmhaigh territory, but there were significant clusters in the surrounding Emania and Ibrun territories. This dispersal of the Finnertys from Clann Conmhaigh appears to have begun quite early in about the 13th century. With the Norman invasion of Connacht, the Finnertys were pushed out of Dunaman and dispossessed of much of the territory in Clann Conmhaigh. They later married into the Norman Burkes or the Bergs, the Norman lineage of this area, who took control of the territory. But the surname seems to have largely dispersed from the area. O'Donovan, like MacLeisett, considered that there were 2 distinct Finnertys, one of the Sil Murray and one of the Emania. But I explained in the previous slide, there are no Finnerty lineages among either of these groups. So O'Donovan's comments seem to be derived from a segment of the genealogies that was more political than genealogical. If this is Clann Conmhaigh, they were genealogically distinct, and although dominated in later ages, Clann Conmhaigh was likely an independent territory in earlier times. Clearly, we need to develop the test and research further, but this is a really promising haplogroup for another regional tribe. In my first presentation, I inadvertently conflated 2 groups, the Sogain and the Senchineoil. I was later corrected by Dr. Joe Mannion, who has wrote a paper on the distinction several years back, and I do agree that the 2 groups appear to be completely separate populations, both in their treatment in primary sources and in the DNA, although there does seem to be some confusion in the early sources too. The Sogain were a tribe that are said to have been descended from the Cruton of northeast Ulster, who were granted land in Connacht by Queen Maeve probably not long after the arrival of the Emania. On the top left here, you can see the view from the top of Ramore or Rathmore outside Minlaw, the ceremonial mound of the Sogain. I took my co-admin David Cushing on a tour of the historic sites of the region back in the summer when we took this photo. Now there are a couple of groups, as you can see, that lend themselves to the Sogain. There are numerous genetic groupings for the surnames of the Sogain, so the Mannions, Wards, Linens, but the only place we see Sogain surnames intersect is in group BY2695, which contains lineages, very early lineages, of the 2 largest families, the Mannions and the Wards, together. Recently, the Scott lineage from South Roscommon has been added to the group. But there's also another haplogroups, S6185, which Peter Leonard is doing great work to develop, and that contains numerous testers with ancestry in the region and surnames specific to this region, including the Sogain name of Leonard and Lennon. The Senchineoil, on the other hand, the name means the old or the ancient peoples, was probably meant to designate the ancient inhabitants of the area. The oldest haplogroup, according to the ancient DNA, that is still present in the area is haplogroup I2, the descendants of the Neolithic farmers who migrated to northwest Europe in around 4000 BC. With the arrival of the Bell Beakers in about 2500 BC, and the subsequent migrations, the I2 were pushed to the periphery and are most numerous in the west of Ireland and Scottish Highlands today. We have to be careful though, as some I2s in Ireland would have arrived there with subsequent migrations, being swept up, for instance, with the Bell Beakers. But they seem to congregate in the west of Ireland as if they had some sort of cultural or maybe linguistic affinity. And one of the biggest concentrations of I2 is in our region. I've listed the surnames in our project here that emerged from I2 haplogroups. So we've got Cain, Keegney, Feeney, Hines, Coyle, Kilkelly, Mitchell, McGuinness. And as I said earlier, two of our first testers with those two random Cain testers who were estimated to have a common ancestor right back at the dawn of the surname era. So we know that several of these lineages are very early regional names. On the bottom right, I had to play around with some AI to generate this image that represents the confrontation between the Mannion Moor and the Senchineoil when the Mannion first arrived in the region. The origin story of the Mannion describes how St. Graelin created a marsh between the two armies that swallowed up the Senchineoil and allowed the Mannion to prevail through divine intervention, basically. Well, the king of the Senchineoil in that confrontation was Keane. Now, there are several origins of the Cain surname, but I can't help wondering if I2 Cains derived their name from this legendary king, given that we have not only the Roscommon Galway Cains, but several other lineages of Cains within this overarching haplogroup, so all adopting that surname. And if so, you will have to wonder, were the I2s the Senchineoil referred to in the genealogical tracts? But looking at one Mannion grouping does not tell the whole story, and this is another theme in the DNA, that of regional surnames where numerous regional haplogroups or genetic groupings contain lineages of a prominent regional name. A similar pattern can be seen among other surnames in the project, like Ward, Mannion, Hannons. Often a multitude of haplogroups per surname is a product of distinct origins of the name in different parts of the country, but where multiple haplogroups in the same region use the name, the explanation may be different. Mannion, from Ui Maine, was the name of the chiefs of the Sogain, that's on the surname era, and on the map you can see just how concentrated the name is in this region. But the Mannions are not concentrated in one genetic grouping. As you can see on the genetic family tree on the left, Mannion lineages emerge from DF21 group that we just spoke about, but they also emerge from, a very early Mannion lineage emerges from the Ibroon, a somewhat later lineage of Mannions who were originally Kellys and emerged from the Kelly-Keogh haplogroup. There's a lineage emerging from BY198 Imania surname lineages, and another from the Conmhaigh alongside the Farrells and the Reynolds. The last group appear to be a separate grouping, which I'll discuss in the next presentation, but a geographic distribution of the first four suggests that they derived their name from Ui Maine, chiefs of the Sogain. It requires a lot more work to definitively explain the dynamics of these surname adoptions, but the preponderance of the name does seem to exemplify the power of the name in a regional context. It's likely that the name brought legitimacy, and as the Ibroon and later the Mannion expanded into Sogain territory, the adoption of the name would have undoubtedly helped their prospects in ruling the area. Of course, there may have been other explanations for surname DNA switches, like I outlined in my first presentation, but as the local testing is showing, these random switches were not nearly as common as previously thought. I'll say a word on the contraction of names over time then, using an example of the Mogevni or the Keevenis. As you can see on the map, the Keeveney is another very localized surname, concentrated in northeast Galway. We're confident this is genetic signature of these original Keeveneys because their common ancestor of the group is estimated to be in about 1033 at the dawn of the surname era, and several members of the group are from and have known ancestral links to the region. The Keeveneys are said to be descended from the Imania, but they again are actually very distinct members of the I2 haplogroup. So they're descendants of those Neolithic farmers who settled northwest Europe and Ireland in about 4000 BC. They're close to the Cains and other I2s, but are completely separate lineages to the other later arrivals and don't share any ancestors with any of the Imania lineages for about 45,000 years. So that's a fair while back. Now the Keeveney name is spread across most branches, so we can be confident the name originated as Mogevni. But you can see how the name has evolved and contracted over the generations. So it becomes Kavanagh, Cavaney on some lines, and is compressed down to Kinney and Caney on other lines. Now, I often hear people say, no, we're not related. We spell our name with an E. But as you can see here, the range of surname spellings among related group can be massive. So the spelling is very much not significant in determining whether you're related to someone else or not.
There is no escaping the important role that the Connacta played in the history of the region and the territory of Ammonia. The Connacta were an early medieval population group from the northwest of Ireland, from whom the Ineal, the Ibrún and the Ificruch emerged. M222 is a DNA marker associated with the group, and it's an absolutely massive group which shows the power and extent of the group into the modern period. So for instance, about 17% of Irish males descend from RM222, but it's more like about 40% in our project and seemingly in this region. Originally, RM222 was a genetic marker considered to be associated with Niall of the Nine Hostages, but as the DNA testing has progressed, we now know that it's much earlier and compose even the proto-Connacta from the BC period and early Christian period. Of course, we don't know when exactly these groups began identifying as Connacta, but by the time the earliest written sources, the traditions about Conn of the 100 Battles and his descendants, the Connacta, seem to have already been established. Some researchers like Tyrone Bowes argue that the haplogroup originated in Scotland, but I don't see anything in the DNA that supports that. In fact, you'll see numerous lineages who branch off before the core Connacta, Ineal, Ibrún and Ificruch. They can be triangulated all back to the northwest of Ireland. Some lineages emerged from the proto-Connacta are listed here, and some of the earliest ancient DNA samples from the historical era in this region are positive for the marker RM222. For example, I've listed two samples from an archaeological site in Derry-na-Managh in County Galway, dating to about 500 AD, both with M222 descendants of the Connacta. There are various kind of references to the three Connactas in the genealogies. In later times, the Ineal distinguished themselves from the three Connactas, but they were likely originally one of the three, alongside the Ificruch, the earliest Connacta rulers of Connacht, and the Ibrún, who were who took over kind of afterwards. Certainly, it's these three groupings that's most identifiable on the DNA, anyways. The Ificruch, which is haplogroup FGC 23739, have the least testers, but this is not surprising given that they were politically and seemingly genetically overshadowed by the rise of the Ibrún in the later medieval period. And a segment of the Ammonia known as the Ificruch Fen, including the Fahys, Glens and a Flanagan lineage, they're also from this Ifigruch grouping, indicating that the Ifigruch Finn of Emania was in fact genetically the core Ifigruch. And this is not too surprising given that the name and the proximity of the Ifigruch Aine. As you can see on the map here, the Ifigruch Finn controlled the territory in the southwest of Emania, bordering Ifigruch Aine. But the tradition gives the Noctans and the Lallies or Mallallies as chiefs of the Ifigruch Finn. Now the Noctans or Nortons feature in the Ifigruch haplogroup, FGC 23739, but we could do with some more testers. So if there are any Noctans or Nortons out there with ancestry in the region willing to test, or existing testers willing to upgrade, we'd love to support that in the project. The Lallies, on the other hand, are not genetically Ifigruch but Kenalconnell of the Ineal. Project member Michael Lally suggested that they may have been learned lineage who established themselves among the Ifigruch. Certainly there are several lineages in the region that descend from the northern Ineal. We've got a Donnelly tester, and that's actually a big Y test. It's in the pipeline at the moment. But initial testing indicates that the Donnellys are descended from the Kinnell Owen of the Ineal. We have a ward tester who descends from what appears to be the Kinnell Lugduck, and a Kelly test lineage that's also Kinnell Connell. The question is when these lineages move down south into the region. Some, like the Lallies, appear to have been there from a very early date, while others may have been part of the Ultucks who migrated from Ulster over the centuries, but more testing will hopefully clarify this. But the branch of the Connacta who showed the greatest presence in the territory of Emania, and who played such a key role in the history of the region, are the Brún. I spoke previously about the Brún push south from Macro Connacht, which Daniel Curley suggests appears to have displaced the O'Kellys from around Loch Crone in South Roscommon and resulted in them establishing themselves at Loch Calla, near Kilconnell out in the southeast of Galway. The area which came under Brún sway is highlighted in the stripes on the map here, from Daniel's paper previously discussed. The DNA can give us insights about this kind of episode. For instance, one of the particular branches of the Brún that is most prevalent is designated FGC 5939. Several lineages associated with the territory of Emania emerge from this haplogroup, and this seems almost certainly to represent the core of the Sil Murray, who kind of spearheaded the Brún expansion into Emania. For instance, we have a Donlan lineage that descends from this haplogroup, and they have a common ancestor in about 991 AD according to the DNA. So we know that they are originating surname lineage, and testers have ancestral connections to Ballydonlan, so they are most likely the Donlans of Ballydonlan. A significant number of the Mannions of East Galway are also actually descended from the Brún haplogroup. This map doesn't show the full story, as the Brún also expanded into West Galway and then likely into Emania from the west too. While the main Clann Egan haplogroup is BY198, there's also a lineage among the Brún, and other Brún lineages in the project include McCann, McDonough, McDonnell, Murphy, Munro, Neary and Rowley. But as well as the Brún lineages in Emania, there are others that are not Brún, but who tradition associates with their Brún, like the Burns. Now, Byrne is a popular name across most Irish haplogroups. The largest by far are in Leinster, who are leading sept of the Lion or the Lagan. But the name is also prevalent among the Connacta or Proto-Connacta, with numerous lineages, as you can see in the diagram here. Now, the diagram has spelt the name Byrne with a Y. The surname dictionaries say that different spellings were used by different septs of the name, but DNA shows that this was not the case. Each of the septs has testers with all the various spellings. So spelling doesn't really tell us anything. Each sept uses variants of the name. What's interesting is that the Roscommon Burns are not the Brún Burns. The Brún Burns are part of the Brún Breffni. And they include O'Briens as well as Byrne and Burns, and have a distribution in South Ulster. The Sligo Burns are descended from the northern Neil, but our Roscommon Burns branched off from the Connacta about the time of Christ and gave rise to the Burns of Roscommon and the Burns of Donegal. The Roscommon Burns seem, like many of the Mannion tribes, to have been integrated into the Brún genealogies and came to occupy Tir Brún na Sinna, a territory north of Tirmania. This was after the defeat of the Monagans, who were the previous chiefs of the three Tuas, which included the Brún na Sinna. Like many other Ibrún lineages, some of their Burns migrated south, and there is today a significant number in Tirmania and South Roscommon. But they also seem to be related to the Conmhaighs of our region, and we've got 2 testers in the project now, and we'll hopefully develop an understanding of the relationship between them a bit further. One of the regional haplogroups that numerous surnames associate with the Mannion is emerging from is our BY198, which is closely related to the Ibrún but appears separate. This haplogroup includes an early Egan Keegan lineage, whose early date, size and distribution would support an identification with the Clann Conmhaigh, and also an early Larkin lineage, which appear to be Winter Lorcan of the Annals. These are 2 sizable lineages, but we also have early Lyons, Dunn, Curly lineages. We have some later lineages such as Heaney, Morgan and Donlan lineages, and most recently we've added Hannon to the group as well. And these may be early lineages, but we need to do more testing to confirm and push back the origin dates close to the dawn of the surname era. What's interesting about BY198 is that it contains some surname lineages that were claimed by both the Imania and others that were claimed by the Sil Anmchadha. I've tried to illustrate this in the bottom diagram here. For instance, the Egans were integrated into the Imania genealogies, while the Larkins were given a descent from the Sil Anmchadha. It can't be coincidental then that the Egans were Bretons to the Imania, while the Larkins were Ulves to the Sil Anmchadha. This more likely shows the real motivation and purpose of the genealogies. There were political contracts, basically, between the lineages, integrating them into the common ancestry and giving each lineage its place in the kingdom. In this way, they were basically absorbing these families into their political orbit. And you can see on the surname distribution maps that the Larkins were very much concentrated in Sil Anmchadha territory in southeast Galway, whereas the Egans are more concentrated in northern Imania, and in other locations to which Clann Conmhaigh contributed Bretons, such as to the O'Connors in North Roscommon, the Kennedys in North Tipperary, and the McCarthys in Munster. Now, having 2 prominent regional learned families emerge from this haplogroup like this may indicate that the ancestors of the grouping were from an early ecclesiastical professional family, later using their skills to carve out a place for themselves in the professional class of the regional kingdoms. The last topic I want to illustrate is what Viking, Saxon, Norman lineages look like in the DNA. First, we have to say that it's quite hard to distinguish between these 3 groupings in the DNA, as they all originated in the same region of Northern Europe and Scandinavia within a relatively close time scale. Many of the Anglo-Saxons originated in North Germany and Denmark, migrating to Britain between the 4th and 8th century. They were genetically similar, often indistinct from the Vikings, who originated in the same region before migrating to Britain and Ireland between the 8th and 11th century. And the Normans were basically Vikings who settled in Normandy in northern France and adopted French language and custom. So they were genetically indistinguishable, and we rely on determining the dates when they arrived and their surname tradition to determine which they might be. Before we look at 2 Norman lineages from the project, let's talk about the Vikings. So recent DNA studies have shown how genetically diverse the Vikings were, even containing genetically Irish lineages, and this is apparent in the DNA of several haplogroups from our region. Many native Irish haplogroups, like this one on the right, have branches whose testers all trace their earliest known ancestry to Scandinavia. For some reason, this is far more often Swedish than Dane or Norse. But this may be explained by the fact that a large section of southern Sweden was part of Denmark in the Viking era, and this is the area where these testers often trace their ancestry. You can see that this particular Scandinavian grouping branched off from the Irish haplogroup between 800 and 1200, so during the Viking era. Now, it's possible that some Irish were taken away as slaves, but recent studies have shown that the Vikings were made up of diverse genetic lineages and appear to have recruited into the ranks wherever they went. And that may be the case with this grouping, which originates in North Munster near Limerick and on the Shannon, the thoroughfare of the Vikings arriving in Ireland. Now, we always have to be cautious when we're working with limited data, and when we're trying to identify normal lineages, there are a couple of things that make it difficult. I mentioned above the difficulties of distinguishing between Viking, Saxon and Norman DNA, and the fact that the Vikings were much more diverse than previously understood. Also, DNA testing is banned in France, so there's limited testers from Normandy and France in general that might help us connect the dots, and we have some testers from research studies in the diaspora, but haplogroups are quite sparse. We have two surnames in a project whose traditions identify them as Norman lineages. These are Joyce and Fitzmaurice. The Fitzmaurices are understood to have Norman descent, like most Fitz names in Ireland. Fitz being French fils, Norman equivalent of Mac for Irish lineages. The main progenitor of the name is thought to be Maurice Fitzgerald, who became Lord of Kerry. A branch of the Prendergast of Mayo is also understood to have adopted the name, and there may be other Fitzmaurice lineages too. Thomas de Joyce is the first recorded Norman Joyce in Ireland in the 13th century. He married Honora O'Brien of Thomond and settled in an estate on the Galway-Mayo border, now known as Joyce Country. Within a few generations, the Joyces seem to have done what the Normans did best, adopted their environment, Gaelicised thoroughly, and became a very prominent family in the region. Now, when we look at the DNA, these lineages both are identifiably distinct from Gaelic Irish lineages and have certain features that support an identification as Normans. For instance, the Fitzmaurice group seems to begins in its expansion around the turn of the 1st century when the Normans came to power. Before this, we have no testers branching it off at all the way back to 2000 BC. So it's quite difficult to say where they originated in an intervening period. But if they were of French or Breton ancestry, as many Normans appear to have been, the ban on testing in France and the general lack of testing on the continent may explain this. And this lineage is from the overarching haplogroup DF27, which Tibor Fair associates with the continental Celts and which other Norman lineages like the Burkes descend. And in the centre you've got an effigy from the Burke plot in Balnakill Abbey near my mother's home place. So it's believed that to be a likeness of Richard de Burgh, the first of the Burgh lords to settle in Ireland. The Fitzmaurice group, though, is a mixture of Maurice and Fitzmaurice, so some of the group may have dropped the Fitz along the way. But when you're working with only 4 advanced testers, it's very limited data, but there's nothing in the DNA at the moment that would contradict the Norman origin for the lineage. The Joyce lineage is much more developed with dozens of advanced testers. This lineage is from the R1A overarching haplogroup, which we know is prevalent among the Vikings and Normans. The lineage on this occasion begins its expansion in the Viking era, consistent with the Norman origin again. The deep ancestry of the lineages links back to Denmark and Norway, with the modern day tester nationalities of those branching off in the Viking era is actually from Britain. So the lineage may have been a Viking lineage in Britain when the Norman group arrived. With their shared ancestry, it would not be too surprising if the Viking lineages were indeed absorbed into the Norman establishment as they sought to establish themselves in Britain. Certainly from about 1230, which is not far off the birth date for Thomas de Joyce, descendants are all invariably Irish and almost all bear the Joyce name, or variants of it. So again, the DNA is consistent with Norman origins for this lineage. I'll conclude with an overall picture that's developing of the genetic makeup of the lineages in the region, or at least my interpretation of it. As you can see from the diagram here, several of the haplogroups contain consolidated pairs or groups of surnames associated with their group and are related to one another in the genealogical time frame. But the relationship between the various tribes or population groups is much more remote. So the common ancestor between the Kellys, the Egans, Larkins or Donlans is about 2000 BC. And the relationship to the Maddens or Finnertys
is even more remote in about 2500 BC, which Keegan is, who are I2 haplogroup, it's about 45,000 BC. So all these groups are to all extents and purposes genetically and genealogically distinct from one another. Now we've seen from the example of Clann Conmhaigh and Winter Larkin that the genealogies align well with their political affiliations. So the Egans with the Mannion, the Larkins with the Sil Anmchadha. But the DNA shows that while they have shared ancestry with one another, they're genetically distinct from both the Mannion, O'Kelly's, Keoghs, and the Sil Anmchadha, Maddens and Colahans. These lineages may have emerged from an earlier ecclesiastical or learned kindred who went on to make up the professional ranks of the regional kingdom of Mannion and Sil Anmchadha. But the biggest lesson is that the genealogies and traditions about the relationship between different surnames within tribes is proven quite accurate, while the relationship between the different tribes and population groups is not, and it appears to be politically motivated, with all these surname lineages being integrated into an overarching pedigree, a sort of political contract setting out the position of each family within the kingdom of Mannion. Thanks a lot for taking the time to view this presentation. Thanks to my co-admins David Cushing, Martin Curley and Jim Halloran for their support, and thanks to all those who have joined the project. We've had an influx of joiners throughout the year, and I'm still working through contacting members, giving them feedback about their genetic roots and their relationship to the others in the project. I hope this presentation has given some sort of idea of the benefit of being part of a project like this in terms of understanding your overall context of your ancestry and your DNA. And hopefully with more joiners and testers we can make more progress. Of course, we'd love to have new testers from all surnames associated with the region to learn more. One name I've been looking at recently is Doyle and McDowell. Daniel Curley has written a paper on the martial world of medieval Mannion, which is due for publication, and this explores the role and the locations of the McDowells as Gaelic of the Mannion. My own research indicates that the McDowell name evolved in some instances into Doyle, but Doyle also has other origins, including Viking origins in the region. So it'd be great to get some Doyles and McDowells with ancestry in the region into the project to explore this further. So if anyone's interested, just drop me an email and we can get a test out to you. Thanks a lot and have a great crit.